Yes, good evening, everybody. My name's Hamish Armstrong. If you don't know me, I'm very pleased to be here tonight to represent the financial regulator, who obviously has quite a role in this whole space. I'm pleased to be here tonight, firstly because the regulator tends to get a bit of a bad rep in these kind of discussions. I can't count the amount of times that I've heard, we'd love to do this, but the regulator won't let us. We'd love to do this, but we need some clarity from the regulator. We'd love to do this, but we don't think we can convince the regulator it's good enough. Hopefully, me being here tonight is going to dispel some of those misunderstandings and those misconceptions. I do work in the Financial Crime Policy Unit, so I've personally got a bit of an interest in this. And I'm not here for completely altruistic reasons, so I would like to plug a bit of work that we've done recently, which is a new section of our AML CFT handbook that we publish, which contains guidance for the regulated community here in the financial sector. We've published a new section in there all about electronic identification measures, or EID as we call it. So if you bear with me, I won't keep it very long, but I'd like to tell you a bit of history of how we got to this point of publishing that piece of guidance, which will hopefully kind of expand on our view of the sector and our anticipation of what might develop. So we started thinking about electronic identification measures, about the use of technology in ID, probably about 2 years ago, when we had a number of product providers come to us and say, well, they're thinking about launching their products in Jersey. They want to speak to the regulators, obviously, to see what the requirements were and whether the product was viable. So we had these discussions with them, and we, some of them were very good, some of them weren't so good, some of them were sort of in the middle. But the conclusion we came to very quickly was there's nothing in the regime at the moment to prevent the use of this kind of technology. I won't bore you with the details, but essentially the legal requirement we have in Jersey is to identify your customer on the basis of documents or data or information. So that even for a start, that's more than most people think. It's not just documents. Documents, data or information from a reliable source, reliable and independent, that gives you comfort that you know who you're dealing with. And that's it. That's the legal obligation. There's nothing to prevent any measures being used at all so long as they achieve that purpose. But obviously what we do then, and as I've said, the AML handbook, what we do is we set out what we call some safe harbours. And we say, in order to comply with that legal obligation, you can do A, B, C or D. If you see a passport, that's one way of doing it. If you see a certified copy, you've probably heard of all that, that's another way of doing it. Using external data sources, and we think about things like like the experience checks that you get in the UK, that type of thing. You can use these external data sources to verify identity. That's already there in the handbook. But those are just safe harbours, so there's nothing to prevent anybody using any other measures, including electronic ID measures. So that's where we stopped, and we said we don't need to say anything because there's nothing to prevent it. Firms in Jersey can use this right now. And we spoke to some of our counterparts in other jurisdictions like the UK, and they came to the same conclusion. There's nothing to prevent it, so they're not going to say anything either. So we just sat back and said, okay, there's nothing to prevent it, go for your life. And as you can imagine, 6 months later, 9 months later, the product providers came back to us and said, we're just not getting any traction. All the firms here in Jersey are just still really unwilling to take that plunge, to use something new without some more comfort from the regulator. So back in March of last year, we issued a public statement saying there is nothing wrong with using electronic ID measures. As long as you do it properly, there's nothing to prevent you using it. So we sat back again and said, surely that gives some comfort. And that was back in March. And the feedback we got was, firms are still unsure in the space. They're not quite sure how to leap into this kind of unknown territory. So what we then did was we said, okay, what we'll do is we'll help them even further by issuing some guidance, which is essentially a method of undertaking a risk assessment, a method of looking at a product, thinking about what the risks are and thinking about whether that product is good enough. So what we've done is we've issued this, as I say, this EID guidance that was published on our websites and as part of our official guidance in December, so it's been out for a few months now. And what that does is says if you're going to use specifically what was focused on is the use of mobile phone and tablet technology to capture images, like you've heard about tonight. If you're going to use that kind of technology, we see there's kind of three main risks. The first is the risk that the document itself has been forged. Okay, the risk that somebody's sellotaped a different photograph over the top of the passport, something that basic. How does this technology, how does this product mitigate that risk? And we've set out 6 or 7 ways that a product can do that, can mitigate that risk, and you've heard some of them tonight. Second risk is the risk that the information gets tampered with at some point between collection on the tablet or the mobile phone and the endpoint. And again, we've set out 4 or 5 different ways that we've seen in some of these products that mitigate that risk. And lastly, what's the risk that the person making the application has somebody else's credentials? If I find somebody's passport on the side of the street and try and log on using one of these tools, what's that biometric match, if you like? And again, we set out 5 or 6 or 7 ways of mitigating that risk. This is all based on some of the things that we've seen in the products that we've spoken to over the last 2 years or so. And if you look at that guidance, some of the things that have been spoken about by Vix tonight are some of the things that we recommend as potential ways of mitigating those risks. So here we are, so 2 years down the track from that, from first starting to think about it. We've said publicly that there's nothing to prevent anybody using this kind of technology. We've said that in public statements. That's almost a year old now. We've put out some guidance to help firms do it if they're still a bit concerned. And we've gone even further. We've said if any firms are actually thinking about doing this and really want, what firms always want a stamp of approval. They always want a tick in advance from the regulator. We can't give that, but come and talk to us. Come and talk to us if you're thinking about it. We'll sit down with you and we'll talk you through the process and we'll talk you through where our concerns might be and how you might mitigate them. So we think we've gone about as far as we can go at the moment to encourage some movement in this space. And from our point of view, and from the state's point of view, it's a bit disappointing that hasn't been as much take-up as we kind of anticipated or as we would have hoped. But hopefully, the next stage for us, now that we've got those statements out there, now that we've got that guidance out there, is a bit of outreach like this, what I'm doing tonight. So hopefully we can get the message out there that we're not the handbrake in this process. We're not preventing this going forward. We see this, if done properly, as being just as robust, if not more robust, than going in physically with a passport and showing it to a junior bank teller, for obvious reasons. So I'm quite happy to take any questions on EID in general or the regulator's approach to technology in this space. Otherwise, I'll be sitting on the panel and take any questions later. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Hamish. Thank you.